Welcome everyone again. We have 1 hour to talk about the ideas of this book. I don't know if some of you already had the opportunity to read, to engage with these ideas, but we're gonna present in general and then we can open for a conversation. This is, Sheila and I wrote this book also as an invitation to see ourselves and the world as a complex, connected system. And I would say that those of you already working with social construction already see this interconnection, these interconnections between us, nature, society. However, when we enter the world of research, things get complicated, as you know. So in traditional research, we tend to work with stability, uniformity, prediction and control, always trying to search for single solutions. And usually reality is seen as fixed, stable. And in this book, Sheila and I, we are trying to subvert and to transcend the idea of single solutions and dichotomies. We are trying to produce this, we are looking at knowledge and meaning as something that is happening all the time in our daily life. So if you see this cartoon here, I really love this cartoon. It is a way to show how we are in our everyday lives doing research. Even if we are not framing like it, we are always producing knowledge. And that's why we come with this bold statement that we are all researchers. Right, Sheila?
Right. So one of the things that became very, very clear when we started working with PhD students was that we had all these wonderful practitioners wanting to explore their practice in the form of a PhD project. And they would be very excited about it. And then the minute they would start thinking of the R word, research, they would feel insecure. And so it became really important, I think, for us to really get the message out that, as this statement says, we are all researchers. And, you know, to kind of bust apart one of the myths of research, or what is generally known as the received view of research, what most people think research is, or the received view of science. And that is that it's about discovery. And that in order to discover, you need the right tools, you need the right questions, you need to look in the right places, and you will discover the nature of the world. Contrary to that, and the message that we give in this book is that research is not about discovery. It's not about the right tools and the right questions in the right place and the right people. It's about a process of co-creating a new way of understanding our worlds, and thereby engaging in processes of social transformation. So that becomes a central feature as we think about all of us as potential researchers. Just in our everyday life, we are always inquiring about our surroundings and ourselves. Do you want to go to the next slide, Celiane? So in the book, we lay out, I have to say, just as a footnote here, I think this is the most practical book I've ever written in my life, thanks to Celiane, pushing on that dimension. But in the book, we lay out 4 phases of research, of a research process, but it's not a method. It's not starting in phase 1, going to phase 2. We could pick up any of these phases, but it's just a way of for us to kind of integrate constructionist ideas with design thinking to look at research in a particular way. So basic to this whole framework is this idea that we are intervening, we are engaged in processes of social transformation when we engage in research. So again, it's not about discovery, but it's about doing some change work, doing some transformational work. And we have to acknowledge that the questions we ask bring forth the answers we get. So as we'll see, as we move through this framework, the way in which we pose a question becomes really critical. But as we create meaning and understanding in our interactions with each other, our own participation as researchers becomes critical to examine. It's not us as outsiders doing the research, but it is how we engage with the populations, the communities, the people with whom we are engaged in a research process. Celiane, you want to add?
Yes. So this is the framework we created. And as Sheila said, we wanted to do a very practical book, a book that would have the academic relevance that researchers can tap on and show how do we work with knowledge and how we understand knowledge. And at the same time, that could be a guideline with some ideas for a research path that you could follow, but not necessarily. So the intention is to support researchers and practitioners in this journey of a more relational, creative, and innovative research, offering this possible path. So as Sheila said, you could follow this 4 research paths in a linear way, in a continuous way, but you could also do in different formats, or even just take one phase depending on the project you are doing. Also, as a consultant, as a practitioner, each phase could help you with different types of engagements and understanding of your system. To give you some context, the framework is a combination of the epistemology of social construction, so the whole philosophy of what is knowledge, how knowledge is socially constructed by people in their relationships, how is context related, and as a way to show an alternative approach to research. The other side of the framework is the design thinking, which offers some practical resources with principles such as being human-centered, being context-related, being co-creational. And in the world of design thinking, you have a variety of tools, and we like to call resources, because we are not offering any techniques, but we are offering some resources that might help you with the different phases of research. And I would say from my experience as a researcher, when I'm talking to a social constructionist researcher, usually this researcher is quite well versed in the whole epistemology and philosophy of what research is and can do. But then, how do you do that? Very often, it's difficult to see, okay, so in concrete ways, how do I apply all these abstract ideas? On the other hand, when I work with designers and design thinkers, they have on their hands so many.
Hold on, I
think we have someone unmuted. So if you all could mute yourself, we can avoid some noises in the background. Thank you. So in design thinking, you have this collection of tools and resources on how do you engage people, how do you co-create. But sometimes the philosophy behind it might be lost. When you combine both of them, you have this good match in which you have the philosophy, but you also have something very applied when you move into the how do we do that. We're going to go briefly into each phase of the framework, and I will start with the first one, which is about when you enter into the field, It's heavily inspired by appreciative inquiry. So how can you appreciate your topic, and how can collaboratively co-create this topic? So this first phase focuses on relational processes. It's a reminder to the researcher that even though you might have a passion, you might have a topic that you want to work with, you don't start with a hypothesis or a fixed research question, but you come with your plans and engage with your system and with your research participants. And in this process of engaging and creating this collaborative approach, slowly you start understanding the topic from a different perspective, and also including the perspective of your context and of your participants. So then you can merge what you might find within the literature review and what we say the gaps in the literature, but also what do you find in the place where you are doing your research? What is the demand of that specific place? It also calls the attention of the researcher. So here, from the beginning of the book, we try to remind the researchers that from this approach, we move from this neutral and objective researcher that is trusting the methodology as if you have the right methodology, you're going to get your answers right, but moving into research as a change agent, in the sense that at the moment you enter the system, the first questions you are asking, you are already provoking changes or influencing the thinking and the system you are working with. So being a researcher, you are always implicated and involved with your topic. So you should be always reminded of that. So any decision making for your research path, go through this reflexive mode of to whom is this important, where I'm doing that, who is included, who is excluded, and how I would like to go together with the research participants. You are on mute, Sheila.
Sorry. Just to add one thing to that, another way of thinking of that first phase is to think of it as really creating the relationship with the context and with the people involved, and sort of crafting a space to have different kinds of conversations that are collaborative. And then in phase two, we're looking at research questions. How can we define the issue at stake, the challenge to be explored? And how might we reframe it so that we're looking in terms of possibilities? We're embracing ambiguity and uncertainty instead of, for example, in a traditional research approach, coming in knowing, as I said earlier, what questions we need to ask, what tools we need to use so that we can get the right answer. Here we are looking at our questions as interventions and asking ourselves questions like, what questions might create or help us craft a more desirable future? How can we frame and reframe what's going on in this situation? How might we open possibilities? So, for example, Celiane, do you want to move to the next slide? For example, we might want to explore the issue of food waste. Okay, and generally we see food waste as a problem. We want to solve it. We want to ensure that poverty and starvation across the world is being reduced. And so we start asking questions: who's to blame? How are we going to fix it? Where's the problem? Okay. The paradigm we're proposing is Yeah, thanks. Shifting from food waste to food sharing, which we see as a more appreciative orientation. This is just an example. So we're all involved in the issue of food sharing, and let's explore new possible avenues that we could take to resolve the issues of food waste. Okay. So it just takes a different tenor to the whole topic. Do you want to add, Celiane?
Yeah, so when you get into this phase, which is frame your questions, and that will become the compass of your research, you start you start going, the what I call the how do you do that? So you have the compass, and now you go after answering these questions. So this phase, the third phase, is about data generation and data meaning making. And here in the book, we make a very clear difference between data collection and data analysis, which is more related to the belief system that there is one reality out there waiting to be discovered. And we go with the right method and we collect it. And once we have this collected, we can look into the data and we can analyze and get the real thing from the raw data. We are inviting researchers to call, instead of data collection, data generation, in the sense that the moment we enter the field, this research process is already a process of social intervention. So the way we are defining the research process, the way we are selecting our participants, the way we are framing the questions, we are already setting the stage, and we are also opening up opportunities for new configurations. So we are generating data and we are generating possibilities. And this, again, is related to what we were talking before, that research is also intervention. So this process of data generation is a process of intervention, is a process of inviting new ways of being together, new possibilities for the system. So we are not simply promoting knowledge of the system, but we are also creating change and creating transformation into the system. And then when we go to the data meaning making, we are not just finding out what is in there, but we are making possible interpretations. And those interpretations, they're pretty much connected to the researcher background. And it's very important that we have ways to be reflexive upon what it is that we are finding data that is not just connected to our own perspective. And if we have research participants that become co-researchers, we can add more perspectives on making meaning of this data and then opening up for possible results, solutions, or transformation into the system. And that's why we also invite researchers to see what else is possible when we are generating data that goes beyond validated questionnaires that are based on previous protocols and instruments that always ask the very same questions for those topics. If we start asking completely new questions, if we frame questions that are related to our context, new possibilities of conversations might emerge. So we know that we cannot control conversations, but they are also not random. So the way we frame our questions are also invitations for some directions and some kinds of conversation. So this is also an important moment for the researchers to really think about what kind of questions I want to frame and what kind of invitations I'm trying to make in this research and in this system.
Celiane, can you go back for just a second to that slide? I just wanted to underscore, it probably doesn't need to be said, but on the left side there, we see again this sort of tenor of right and wrong. The data collection, am I collecting the right stuff, as opposed to data generation, which is completely open, that we are inviting the participants and ourselves to generate new interpretations, new understandings, and the same with data analysis versus data meaning making, that instead of having the right analysis, we are creating new possibilities. Okay, if you go to the next. So the last phase is forming futures. It's where we experiment with the ideas that have been emerged, the meaning making that has emerged from the process, and try to implement it, tinker with it. If something comes up as we're implementing it, it's not something that has to be implemented in exactly a certain way, because it's an ongoing, unfolding process. So the focus here is on the utility and the relevance in context for the people for whom this project is relevant. So we're not looking for generalizability, for example, although we certainly could say, this is interesting. This worked really well in this community for these people. Are there lessons that we could transfer to some other community? But we wouldn't expect a one-to-one correspondence, of course, because the uniqueness and the idiosyncrasies of the particular context become really important. It's also a move from, how the research results fit the world, which would be a more traditional frame, to a question of how these research results create possibilities in the worlds of the people affected by this project. So very much evolving and ongoing. It's not about discovering the answer to a problem, but creating multiple possibilities, taking into consideration multiple stakeholders, multiple points of view, not attempting to adjudicate amongst them, but somehow inviting them into the process where new understandings of a common situation emerge. So, Celiane, shall we?
Yeah. I mean, I'm showing back the the 4 phases again, so you can see it complete now. So from the presentation, you might notice that this is a logical research path, but you could also play around the phases and also just use one. And for each of the phases, we offer in the book some exercise and some resources that can help you with going through these phases. And for example, in the generative research questions, you can play around framing and reframing what you have and see how can you expand, zooming, how can you zoom out and zoom in and get different perspectives that helps you to reframe questions. So you could do this phase for a consulting project in which you are gathering so many informations and you want to frame into powerful questions that will guide your process. So you could be doing these exercises and these resources just to frame and reframe your question. So you might use depending on your topic, your context, and your project.
Yeah, I would just repeat that there are many, many, many examples of actions you can take or tools you can use in each of these phases that are included in the book. So it's really a guide, but not a stepwise guide, but more what seems to make sense for you in this context, given this project that you're interested in. Just a number of ideas and probably many, many others that aren't even included in the book. So it's just fodder for thought, actually. Shall we open to questions or?
Yeah, so we still have 30 minutes. I was wondering if we should just open for questions or maybe give 10 minutes to the participants to sit together in a small group and maybe talk a little bit and frame questions. What do you think, Sheila?
Sure, we could, do some breakouts and see if you can come back with questions. If somebody were to raise their hand right away, then we would just go with questions or comments. Okay, Shanti.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself.
That's okay.
And let me quickly apologize for a tardy entry because of problems with the Zoom link. Mine is not so much a question, but you start with appreciation, and I would like to do the same, and appreciation and affirmation, because of what you are saying builds on what has already been implicitly present in many of the discussions about research methods, pitting against each other and opposition instead of the integration that you provide. I particularly recognize your ideas as you develop them, because my own background is in anthropology, and anthropological research in certain fields is very much already what you're describing, which has led to it being considered sort of half-baked methodologically, because it's so unlike the so-called hard sciences. So just a few points of appreciation. You emphasize that research is about all of us. You go beyond the gulf between the researcher and the researched, which is so sadly intrinsic to so much research, especially social research. It can be argued that this is somewhat antisocial research. I also very much like your emphasis on action. We hear the somewhat oxymoronic observation about action research, as if that's some sort of different research. But all research has some implications for action. We need to recognize this. I know that many people have ideas to contribute, so I will end with two things. One is that what you were saying about data collection, it exactly echoes what I have long felt, that people talk about data as a sort of extraction, when actually research is an immersion in a context and getting to know and understand it, a little bit like going underwater and holding one's breath. My only difference from you would be with the word implement, yes, which I find a little unnecessarily concrete, so to speak. I do try and avoid terms like respondents and the like, and implement has a little bit of that sort of practical, in quotes, let's roll up our sleeves and get on with it, a very concrete action. Let me end there with renewed appreciation. Thank you, Celiane and Sheila.
Thank you, Shanti. That's I like everything you said was just is resonating with me, but also maybe we just leave it as experimentation rather than implementation. Yes. So that's a very good point. Thank you.
Thank you.
I also like the anti-social research comment. Madeline, hello.
Hello to both of you. What an extraordinary presentation. And I say that from the perspective of looking at your cartoons. They actually supported what you were saying by not duplicating what you said, but expanding on it. So I really want to compliment whoever designed those marvelous cartoons. Having sat through many, many, many presentations, it was a delight to see them. There was one word on that I could not read, even though I turned my head and tried to read it. It's on the third one, and it's something and something, and I couldn't read it. And I want to know what those words were. I believe it's the red one.
It is the third one?
No, maybe not.
Ideate and and prototype.
Oh, prototype. That's what I could not read, prototype. Thank you.
And we should give our illustrator, Lara Krenzinger, all the credit in the world. She did a fabulous job illustrating this book. That's what, not only is it practical, but with all these illustrations, it's super practical. So it's really nice. She did an outstanding job. We would just say, could you come up with some image of, different ways we could do research, like in a lab, in the library, in the field, and she would just, come up with something. It's great.
Oh, finding a graphic artist that has that capability is truly wonderful. I think I've worked with only one in my career that could do that kind of work. So congratulations to you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Madeline. Jeff.
Thank you. Yeah, I echo what has already been said around the book. I attended the social construction introduction practices and premises with Celiane last year, and this is where I came to learn of the book, and I purchased it and I digested it late last year, and I thought it was very easy to read and understand, especially someone that's new to social constructionism. And my question was around the integration of the framework with design thinking. I was wondering if either of you could share a little bit more about how design thinking integrates with the framework. If a researcher should spend some time going into design thinking to better understand your framework. I know that the words that are on the high-level framework align with the methodology in design thinking, as I understand from the book. I was just wondering if you had any more thoughts or words around that.
Yeah, I can say something about that, Jeff. We try, so in the book, we try to provide more knowledge on constructionism and design thinking in regards to the research process. Of course, the more you know about those fields, the better you understand the connection. But to me, the design thinking approach brings a lot of this trial and error perspective, the learn by doing perspective, which usually in research, I would say in everywhere in our society, we are taught to first learn it and then do it. So first we should know everything before we apply what we have learned. And designers, they say fail faster to learn faster. So they encourage you to really enter the field and start experimenting and learning with participants, with the context. And within this learning, the process happens. So the integration of a more high-level philosophical approach on what is research, the interconnection between society, people, nature. We offer the constructionist approach and then the more practical principles of how to stand as a researcher comes from the design thinking and how design thinkers, they really engage with the field by connecting to people and by really being at the moment and connecting and being very present with what's happening. So constructionism talks about that. Design thinkers, they offer many resources on how do you do that in each phase of a project. So that's why this combination kind of supports the researcher to have the understanding and the doing together. And of course, it's the effort is to make very explicit what we already talk about research as a process of social transformation that sometimes is so difficult to put that in words and also in the academic world to show the relevance of this kind of approach.
Okay, thanks. So my takeaway from what you've shared is that it is could promote a more unbiased entry into a context that allows multiple perspectives to be considered as we chart this this new future.
I would say,
did I catch it?
Yeah, you got it. But the bias, we try to take advantage of the bias. So we are all biased by everything. But if you acknowledge that, then you can kind of reflect upon where those biases are come from and how can I use that in the favor of the research, in the favor of the context, and really play with all these perspectives together.
Thank you so much. Love the book, Celiane, Sheila. Great job. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Chris, hi.
Hi, thank you both for your presentation, and I look forward to the book. My question, I just was wondering if you could offer some examples of exercises or practices that you suggest in the forming futures section.
I have to look in the book to do that.
Opening the book right now.
You know, you write something and then you put it aside and forget everything that you. So.
Or even your general, like how you imagine. I like the idea of like there is no. I think there was a critique of prediction initially, Celiane, and about going to one place. But I'm wondering how, like futures in the plural, how do you begin to think about that?
Yeah, I appreciate what Shanti was talking before about implementation, and then Sheila talked about experimentation. There's always this challenge of how do you language something. So you are doing something and then you need to report it, you need to language it to communicate. And in the forming future phase, which is also called experiment and implement. One example, and we show here, there's this beautiful picture from also our designer, where we talk about the experimentation performance as a dance of agency. And how can you create a dance in which the multiple actors involved, you invite them to engage, and then by experimenting with these findings that emerged from the previous phase, you start understanding what might worked for us in this specific context. And as you do this dance and you experiment, we call the implement, which means then you get into a moment that you say, this works for us, you know, and then you can take the next step and you can really implement some ideas and have a call for action and start having this into the system that you are proposing that. So I really like to call the dance of agency, because it is about the creating future. It is about experimenting those performances with the research participants, with those that you are doing the research with.
Do you want to, Celiane, just talk a little bit about the Crazy Eights, like just to give an example of one of the design tools that could be used in that phase? Or
yeah. So if you are working with a group of people that have a lot of opinion, or they know their context, their system, and you want to generate more ideas that goes beyond the rational pre-ready answers that they have, these Crazy Eights, you ask everyone to write 8 ideas in 1 minute. And then they have to come up with completely, unexpected possibilities of how they would see a situation. And these exercises and these propositions, they are fun, but at the same time, they help you to go beyond those rational ideas. And then all of a sudden you have a combination of answers on the same topic. That is the initial phase to play around it and to make combinations that will expand the initial topic and gives you different possibilities of directions. Super simple, you don't need much resource to do that, but fun, engaging. And again, as we said, research is intervention. The process of engaging these people to play together, to explore together, is also a phase in which you're already proposing a connection among the communities.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chris.
Arlene. Hello.
Hi, let me get myself back on. Thank you so much for this. It's really, I really appreciate the deep and rich processual nature of what you're talking about. I wanted to pick up on this whole notion about language, because words like implementation and intervention have a very different meaning in traditional research. And so people are going to go into that loop and see, okay, now you're going to tell us what's really important. And so that brings me to a question that we all struggle with this way of being. How do you navigate traditional contexts? So you have this really great research topic, or you're teaching students, and so how do you navigate and become multiply answerable to the different contexts? You know, so you have a great research topic, but the country the person's from, or the traditional graduate program has their own requirements. And so that gets me to what Shanti was saying also about, I draw a lot from processual anthropology, because you are being with, and it's wonderful to have that resonance. And my video got lost again, sorry. And the other thing is, so words like intervention, you get traditional research saying, oh, goody, now they're gonna have the answers. So those are some of my loose thoughts. And again, drawing on how do you navigate what's required for people who do research. So just some loose thoughts I'd love to hear.
Yeah, no, I mean, those are really central questions that arise all the time. And I think one starting place is to say, you know, from a constructionist perspective, all methods, all ways of operating, all ways of even talking about research are the byproduct of people interacting. So they're all constructions. And we know that those constructions then contribute to the creation of entire institutions. So we have the entire institution of scientific research and people who align themselves with that. And then a lot of practitioners get, I'll use the word trapped in those institutions, wanting to do more participatory, engaged research, but being held to a standard of, you know, traditional research. So if we start from that presumption that all ways of engaging in what we call research are viable within communities, certain communities, then the question is, you know, why can't you employ some of those standard techniques? It's not that the technique, like giving a survey or doing an analysis of variance or something, it's not that those are bad. It's what you do with them. Do you then say that this survey has given us the truth? Do you say this analysis of variance has given us the truth? Or can you kind of play with it and mix it up and say, this is very interesting. How many interpretations can we take from this approach, from this analysis? And way back in the 1980s, I actually engaged in research just like that with my colleague Laura Fruggeri in Italy. And we were interested in in the 80s, and unfortunately, I think it's come back around. All social service providers were burned out. They were all experiencing burnout. And it was an individual pathology. You have a problem if you're burned out. And there still is an inventory. It's called the Maslach Burnout Inventory. You take the short little test and it just shows you how extremely burned out you are, or not at all, or what have you, on 2 dimensions, emotionally, and I forget the other. So we interviewed these teams of social service providers, 8 teams in Italy, 8 teams in the US, and we gave them the burnout inventory, and then we engaged in a systemic interview with them, asking relational circular questions, things like, how would your supervisor define you as a team? Mm-hmm. How do you define yourselves as a team? How do your clients define you? Just all these questions, and which was really interesting because in the US, the answer was, no one sees us as a team. We're not a team. No, it's so American, right? But then through these interviews, we went back and took the data from the inventory, like this person's really burned out by this measure. And we came up with a narrative story that made sense of how being burned out, it's very systemic sort of hypothesis, about by being burned out, this person allowed other team members to be helpful, to, accomplish something that needed to be accomplished in the team, so that being burned out was no longer conceived of as a negative individual quality, but was seen as some kind of dynamic of the group, of the team. Anyway, just to say that that's a one example of being able to use some data to appease some people, but it's what you do with it. We didn't treat that as the truth. We treated that as, that's an interesting result for that person. How do we make sense of that in the larger relational context that this person's operating in? So, go ahead.
It goes back to, you have to be what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You have to, in the moment, sort of drawing on being, so that people see how you make meaning and making meaning with them, rather than saying, well, no, that's not the way we work. We don't do that.
Yeah, exactly. It's in that opposition that we keep the division alive, right? You don't do the right kind of research. Oh, you do bad traditional research. We are trying, and this book, I think, also is a real attempt to kind of dissolve that divide. It's not what's good, bad, right, or wrong. It's, how do we engage in meaningful forms of practice that help the world, that help the communities that we work with. That should be the bottom line. It shouldn't, and unfortunately, the bottom line usually is, how is this going to help my career?
Yes. How many publications can I get out of this research? Which brings in also the importance of working with the people that you're co-creating, co-research, before, and ask them, what do you think we should do next? What are the next steps?
Yeah, of course. Yes. Yeah. Thanks, Arlene.
Thank you.
Barack, good to see you.
Hi, Sheila. Yes, great conversation here. So I'm going to make a statement because I'm on the cusp of the last paper that I submitted to Strategy Management Society. So that's the traditional research approach, right? So I actually mentioned that I use the constructionist lens, because I talked to other professors, and specifically one marketing professor who told me, oh, that's action research. Mm-hmm. That means as you conduct the research, your paradigm, everything is changing. So that where do you stand? You have to have a time stamp on what the knowledge, truth or knowledge is. But that's the traditional research perspective in my mind. So I'm going to make a statement because I'm really trying to make the connection between traditional research and construction research. So I was rereading this Kant and Mary's book on social construction, and I read in there, he says that, or they say, knowledge is local.
Mhm.
So from that perspective, my understanding of the constructionist perspective on research is that, okay, knowledge is local and relational. That makes great sense because, like, for example, there's so many research conducted in the US on either social issues, like waste, etc., how to handle waste, or it's health sciences, so much research. But when you apply them in context outside the US, variables are different.
Yeah.
So therefore, either it's technical or social research, local reality and local knowledge is different. And then when you get to like a community, and because of the relationship, is also different. So can we say that traditional approach is where you establish the baseline, but then constructionist approaches actually make it real?
It's real by whose standards? But
from the local perspective, because it doesn't matter. Like, for example, they say, okay, if you take this drugs, etc., do this type of keto diet, etc., it's going to make you feel good and healthy, and so you don't have to spend money on healthcare in your 70s and 80s. But then when you apply to French people, it produces different results. You apply to Asians or Middle Eastern, they're all different results and different variables.
yeah, well, this reminds me of the notion of evidence-based practice. So many people here are, under the thumb of evidence-based practice, meaning that you can only be paid or practice if you use the form, the method, the model, the theory that has proven to have evidence. But that's not what evidence-based practice was initially conceived as. It was initially conceived as a large population study, which produced a best practice, which was then fed down to the practitioners who applied it case by case. And then that information fed back to the large population researchers who would then adjust their large population study, do another one, come up with a best practice. And this was envisioned originally as a continually recursive process, but it's not that anymore. It's, we did this research, we know that this is the best practice, this is what you have to do. And it's become a straitjacket for people. So yeah, I think you're right that, it's not bad to have those large population studies that have results, but we have to understand that every context is unique, and time, history, culture, all sorts of things come into play.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you.
So thank you, big thank you, great work.
We have 3 minutes left. So I'm not sure if we have time for one more question, but I don't see any raised hands. So we have one from Larissa. So maybe a final question, Larissa.
Well, we have 2 here.
Yeah, it is just a comment regarding Barak's comments on what he thought about by your sharing. Thank you for the book and for putting all this together. And I was thinking the same thing. What is the similarity and difference from action research or participatory action research? But as you were presenting, actually the second phase, the generative question phase, I think that's really the thing that makes the whole difference. I don't think that in action research or even in the participatory action research, they worried as much as the importance of inviting the participants to really help generate the questions that we want to answer. So that's something I was thinking about as they presented. So thank you for bringing it up, Barak, and thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, Larissa. And you don't have a question now, Madeline? No?
I'd rather give the time to you two.
Well, I would simply thank everybody for coming today. And thanks, Celiane, for inviting me into this project with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sheila. Thank you all. Thank you so much for today. It was great seeing you. And yeah, hope to engage in this conversation soon with all of you.